She didn't raise her voice when the beer hit her table, didn't flinch when the amber liquid arced through the dim bar light and splashed across her fries, didn't even glance up when the laughter started loud and careless from the group of Marines 3 tables over. Lieutenant Sarah Kincaid just set down her water glass, picked up a napkin, and began dabbing at the spill with the kind of methodical precision that comes from years of controlling exactly what the world gets to see. Because the woman in the corner booth wasn't there to drink. She wasn't there to socialize. She was there to observe. And the 4 men who just made her their joke had no idea they were being evaluated by the one person who would decide whether they ever wore the patch that mattered. But before we show you how their 72 hours unraveled, how a bar incident became a masterclass in leadership, and how 4 cocky Marines learned that respect isn't demanded, it's demonstrated, you need to understand something. Sometimes the most dangerous commander in the room is the one who lets you keep talking. The lights inside Anchor Point Tavern always ran a little too dim, like the place had made peace with being forgotten by everyone, except the people who needed it. It sat just off Route 76 outside Naval Station San Diego, wedged between a tire shop that closed at 5 and a pawnbroker who never seemed to open at all. The walls were dark wood scarred with decades of initials and inside jokes that nobody remembered anymore. The jukebox in the corner had been broken since 2018. The floor had that soft give that comes from years of spilled beer and boot scuff and the weight of 1,000 conversations that nobody wanted overheard. There was no dress code, no live music, no questions asked, which is why it was always full by 8 o'clock. The woman at the corner table didn't look like she belonged, at least not at first glance. Dark gray hoodie, black cargo pants, no patches, no unit pride, no jewelry, no makeup, no alcohol in front of her. Just water with a lemon wedge and a basket of fries she hadn't touched in 20 minutes. She sat with her back to the wall, not to the door. A subtle distinction most people missed. The kind of choice that separates those who've been trained from those who've been tested. The bartender, a man named Tom Bradley, passed by without fanfare and placed a fresh glass of ice water on her table. No smile, no small talk, just a nod. She returned it. One of those slow, deliberate gestures that said thank you without asking for conversation. Tom was 62, gray-beard, forearms still thick from a career that had ended 15 years ago but never really left him. Master Chief retired. Desert Storm 3 tours. The kind of man who knew how to read a room and when to stay quiet. He'd never asked her name. Didn't need to. Something about the way she moved straight back without stiffness. Hands loose, but never idle gaze, still but never passive, told him everything he needed to know. She wasn't known by name here, not by most, but something about her presence, her posture carried weight enough that Tom never carded her, enough that the regulars, even the loud ones, gave her space. She hadn't spoken since she walked in. That quiet was about to be broken. The door swung open, hard hinges protesting, and 4 men entered like they owned the oxygen in the room. Tan camouflage utilities, sleeves half rolled at the elbows, chest pockets sagging from too many hours in field rotation. Their boots were dusty, their laughs louder than necessary, not locals, not regulars, temporary. The kind of men whose assignments gave them just enough time to grow cocky, but not long enough to learn humility. They took the high-top table near the center of the bar, the tallest one broad-shouldered with a jawline that looked like it had been carved for propaganda posters, waved Tom down with 2 fingers and a smirk. "Rounds for the table," he said. "Top shelf. Let's make it a welcome party." "Welcome to what?" the smaller one asked, leg bouncing with nervous energy. "To the only decent bar within 10 clicks that doesn't play country music," the third one said, dragging his stool back with a scrape that made half the room wince. The fourth had already noticed the woman. 10 o'clock, he muttered. "Solo table. Civilian. Maybe contractor." The tall one shrugged. "Ghost program, probably. Or someone's ex." A round of laughter. Not mean yet. Just lazy. Confident. Curious in the way young wolves are before they test the pack. They kept their distance for now. But their eyes drifted. They didn't know her name, didn't know her face, but they noticed her silence. And that was enough to make assumptions. Enough to think they understood her. The woman didn't shift, didn't react. She lifted her glass, drank slowly, and returned it to the exact center of the coaster. At the far end of the bar, another man sat alone. Older, weathered, gray at the temples and along his jaw. He wore a faded leather jacket over a navy t-shirt that had seen better decades. His hands wrapped around a beer he wasn't drinking, just holding. Master Chief Garrett Blackwood, 67 years old, retired. Desert Storm, Somalia, a lifetime of decisions that still woke him up some nights. He didn't look at the woman in the corner booth, didn't need to. He'd been watching her career for 5 years. Ever since she'd walked into Bud's training with a file full of records and a chip on her shoulder the size of Coronado Island. He'd broken her down 3 times during pool comp, watched her fail, watched her come back, watched her refuse to quit even when her lungs screamed and her vision tunneled and every instructor told her why she didn't belong. And when she finally passed, when she earned that trident, he'd handed it to her himself and said 6 words that she still carried. Now prove you deserve to keep it. She had. Garrett took a slow sip of his beer, eyes never leaving the 4 Marines. He knew what was about to happen. He'd designed it after all. 32 years ago in the rubble of Mogadishu, watching a young captain bleed out in the dirt because men didn't respect him until it was too late. Captain Daniel Cross, 28 years old, Special Operations, mocked by overconfident Rangers who thought youth meant weakness. Cross had died proving them wrong, died saving men who should have trusted him from the start. Garrett had sworn that day, kneeling in the sand with Cross's blood on his hands, that he would never let it happen again, that he would create a system, a test, a way to separate the men who could learn from the men who would get people killed. The woman in the corner booth was executing that test right now, and the 4 Marines had no idea they were already failing. Sarah Kincaid's mind was a filing cabinet, and she was pulling folders. Corporal Jake Thornton, 29, Marine Recon, 2 deployments, Iraq and Afghanistan, solid marks in field leadership, marginal marks in team cohesion, flagged twice for insubordination, both times dismissed after peer testimony. The kind of operator who got results but left friction in his wake. Divorce pending, custody battle for an 8-year-old daughter. Psych eval noted, quote, overcompensation behaviors consistent with personal insecurity masked as professional confidence. She watched him gesturing too widely with his beer, voice too loud, smile too forced. He was trying to prove something to men who didn't care. That told her everything. Corporal Marcus Vaughn, 26, communications specialist, high technical scores, nervous under live fire conditions. Psych eval noted anxiety management issues, recommended for additional stress inoculation training, but never received it. Single, no dependents. History of seeking external validation from peer group. The kind of operator who needed approval to feel like he belonged. His leg bounced under the table. Constant motion. Nervous energy looking for an outlet. He laughed the loudest at Jake's jokes even when they weren't funny. That told her everything. Lance Corporal Ryan Mercer, 31, oldest of the group. Former Force Recon, downgraded after shoulder injury. Father was career military Iraq, 2003. Psych notes indicated high situational awareness, low tolerance for incompetence. Divorced. No kids. Quiet. Observant. The only one who'd noticed her twice already. He wasn't laughing, wasn't performing, just watching, calculating. That made him either the smartest or the most dangerous. Private Ethan Wolf, 25, field medic, competent, quiet. No disciplinary record, no commendations either. The kind of operator who disappeared into the middle of every formation. Son of a factory worker from Ohio, joined to escape, stayed because he had nowhere else to go. He hadn't looked at her once, too focused on blending in. That told her everything. Sarah knew their records, knew their scores, knew their strengths and their fractures, but she didn't know how they moved when nobody was grading. Didn't know what they said when they thought command wasn't listening. Didn't know if they had the kind of judgment that couldn't be taught in a schoolhouse. That's why she was here. Off duty, out of uniform, invisible. Admiral James Keller had given her 72 hours to evaluate them for integration into Joint Special Operations Task Force 7. 72 hours to decide if these 4 Marines could function alongside Navy SEALs, Army Special Forces, Air Force Pararescue, and every other high-speed unit that didn't tolerate weakness or ego, or the kind of recklessness that got people killed. 72 hours to make sure she didn't repeat the mistake that still woke her up some nights. The one that made her join in the first place. The one with Captain Cross's name carved into a memorial wall she visited every year. She pushed the thought down. Not here, not now. By the third round, the volume at the Marines' table had doubled. One of them started doing impressions. A bad CO voice barking nonsense orders. Another spun a story about a helicopter insertion gone sideways in the Hindu Kush, clearly embellished. Pauses timed for maximum effect. But it wasn't the noise that mattered. It was the moment one of them, the tall one Jake Thornton, turned from the table to gesture with his beer. He swung wide, trying to punctuate the punchline of a joke nobody outside their circle would understand. His elbow high, his boot catching the side of a loose chair leg behind him. Off balance for just half a second, just long enough for his pint glass to tip. Amber liquid arced clean through the air. It splashed across her table. Half her fries were soaked. The water glass tipped but didn't fall. A line of beer ran across the tabletop, dripping slowly into her lap. For a moment, the bar paused. Just enough to clock the moment. Just enough to decide whether this was going to be a thing or not. Then came the laughter. Jake turned, saw the mess, and held both palms up. "Whoa, my bad. That one's on the chair, not me." The others howled. "Damn thing moved on its own," the one with the nervous leg said. "Maybe it's her fault," another added. "What's she doing sitting that close to a combat zone anyway?" The woman, Sarah Kincaid, Commander, United States Navy SEAL Team 11, calmly set her napkin down, picked up her water glass, shifted it back into place, then began dabbing her lap without urgency, without expression, without even glancing in their direction. That rattled them more than it should have. "You all right over there?" Jake called out, clearly expecting a glare, a sharp word, maybe a middle finger. No response. "You need a towel, or maybe just a sense of humor." Tom appeared from behind the bar, silent as always, and handed her a fresh napkin, a dry glass of water. "Appreciate it," she said quietly. Her voice was low, clear, measured. That was the first time any of them had heard it. "You're not going to throw that one back at us?" Marcus asked, half laughing. She looked at him, one clean glance, no heat, no challenge, then back to the napkin. No words. That's when the tone shifted. They didn't say it aloud, not yet, but the absence of drama, the lack of fury or embarrassment, started to itch under their skin. The way she wiped her hands, the way she reorganized the table. Precise, deliberate. Like this had happened before. Like she was giving them rope. It didn't land the way they thought it would. "Maybe she's just uptight," one muttered. "She's probably writing a Yelp review in her head right now," said another. 0 stars. Marines too rowdy." That got a chuckle. But the woman didn't move, didn't speak again. She just shifted her chair slightly back, not away from them, but to an angle that opened her field of view. Then she exhaled once, barely audible, and went back to watching the muted television as if their storm hadn't even made landfall. Sarah Kincaid had learned a long time ago that silence was a weapon, not the kind that killed, the kind that made people kill themselves. Give a man enough quiet, and he'll fill it with exactly the truth you need to hear. She was counting. Jake Thornton, the loud one, had hesitated for 2 full seconds before calling out to her. That hesitation meant doubt, meant he knew on some level that he'd crossed a line but didn't want to admit it in front of his team. Marcus Vaughn, the twitchy one, had laughed the loudest. Overcompensation, insecurity, the kind of operator who needed external validation to feel like he belonged. Ethan Wolf, the quiet one, hadn't laughed at all, just watched. No judgment either way. A follower, useful in the right structure, dangerous in the wrong one. And Ryan Mercer, the older one. He'd glanced at her twice, not with amusement, with assessment. He was reading the room, reading her. That made him either the smartest or the most dangerous. She filed it all away. By the 4th round, the table had started orbiting her like flies, too bored to stay still. Not direct, not obvious. Just enough to keep her in their periphery, to see if the next provocation might tip her into something reactive. She remained still. They didn't like that. It was Marcus who stood first. He did it casually, carrying his fresh drink with theatrical care like he was trying not to spill it again, grinning at his friends as he meandered toward her side of the bar. "Truce drink," he offered, holding it out. She didn't look up. He held the glass a little higher, looming just near her elbow. "Least I can do after nearly drowning your fries." She glanced at the glass. It was sweating already. A small droplet traced down the side, pooling on her coaster. "No thank you," she said. Not rude, not defensive, just final. He set the glass down anyway, right on the edge of her table. And when she didn't touch it, didn't even flinch, he leaned closer. "You're kind of a mystery, you know that." From behind him, Jake called out, "Careful, Vaughn, she might be CIA." "Could be," Marcus said, grinning wider. "Could be profiling all of us right now." Then casually, far too casually, he bumped the drink forward. It tipped, not violently, not obviously, just enough to send a slow wash of whiskey across her table, over the napkin she just folded, pooling at the edge before dripping off and soaking the cuff of her sleeve. The table roared with laughter. She still didn't react, just stared at the spreading stain like it was the most unoriginal thing she'd seen all day. Tom froze behind the bar. You could feel him weighing the moment, how far to step in without making it worse. She calmly stood. Her chair didn't scrape. She moved it with control, not retreat. Took 2 steps sideways, lifted the edge of her jacket to shake off the moisture. Then turned not to them, but to the other side of the bar. There was an open two-top near the wall. She crossed the floor and sat down, this time with her back to the room. But before she did, she said it. Just one sentence, over her shoulder, soft, even. "You should have made the first spill more believable." This one was obvious. The laughter stopped. Marcus blinked. "What?" She didn't repeat it, didn't need to. At the table, Jake leaned in. "Wait, what did she just say?" "Something about the first drink," Marcus muttered, suddenly less confident. "No," said Ryan, the quietest of them, his brows knit together. "She said we made it obvious." They looked at each other, suddenly unsure if this was still funny, suddenly aware that the woman they'd been mocking hadn't reacted the way anyone ever reacted. Not with anger, not with embarrassment, with assessment. Back at her new table, she lifted the fresh glass of water Tom had already set down for her, took a sip, adjusted the collar of her jacket, and resumed watching the muted television now cycling through highlights from a carrier deck. Landing jets catching wire in perfect mechanical rhythm. She didn't look at them again. She didn't have to. Because somehow, without touching a thing, without raising her voice, without giving them a single moment of the confrontation they had been fishing for, she'd just changed the air in the entire room. The table quieted, not all at once, but in stages, like a joke dragging too long until it loops back into discomfort. Marcus returned to his seat without the same swagger. The others shifted in their chairs, glancing toward the woman's new table with more calculation than curiosity. Jake leaned back and crossed his arms, trying to reclaim the vibe. "She's got some ice in her spine," he muttered. "Thinks she's special forces." The one with the buzz cut snorted. "She's got contractor boots. Bet she teaches classroom stuff. Safety compliance or something." Ryan, the fourth one, hadn't spoken much all night, but now he did. "She never looked at us like we were funny," he said. "Not once." Jake shrugged. "So, doesn't mean anything. Some people are just wired up tight." "Nah," Marcus said, trying to salvage his confidence. "She's nursing a dishonorable and trying not to get recognized." Ryan didn't laugh this time. He just wiped his hand on a napkin, the whiskey still tacky on his fingers. "She moved tables after 2 spills," he said slowly. "Didn't flinch either time. That's not someone new to this. That's someone avoiding a scene." "She's playing invisible," Jake replied. "You see how calm she was. That's not power. That's someone who doesn't want attention." Ryan looked at him. "Or someone who's done this dance before and knows exactly when to step out of the spotlight." Jake scoffed. "Look, if she was anyone important, someone in this place would have saluted by now. Or she'd be with a detail, or at least not drinking water like a high school teacher." But even as he said it, something in his voice wavered. Because none of them could shake the feeling that they'd just been weighed, measured, and cataloged by someone who hadn't needed to say a word to do it. Sarah Kincaid sat at her new table and let the silence do the work. She'd learned this technique years ago, during her second year at Bud's, from a man who was sitting at the far end of the bar right now, nursing a beer and pretending not to watch. Master Chief Garrett Blackwood, 67 years old, retired, Desert Storm veteran. The man who'd pushed her through pool comp on her third failed attempt. The man who'd told her in that gravel voice of his that leadership wasn't about being the loudest in the room. It was about being the last one standing when the loud ones burned out. He'd been her instructor, her mentor, and the reason she was sitting here tonight, letting 4 Marines hang themselves with their own rope. She didn't look at him, didn't need to. She knew he was watching, knew he'd seen the whole thing, knew he had already made his assessment and was waiting to see if hers matched. Back near the wall, she watched the television. A night landing, wheels hitting deck, arresting wire catching. The kind of precision that looked easy but required thousands of hours of training, failure, recalibration, and trust. She thought about Captain Cross, about Mogadishu, about the moment Garrett tried to speak up and been told to stand down, about the sound of the explosion and the way the silence afterward had been so complete it felt like the world had ended. She thought about the 4 men behind her, laughing too loud, drinking too much, making the kind of mistakes that seemed harmless until they weren't. And she thought about the next 72 hours, whether they'd survive it, whether she'd let them. The woman stood 15 minutes later, didn't rush, just folded a napkin, dropped a few bills under her glass, and tugged the sleeve of her jacket once to straighten the cuff. The TV now cycled through grainy footage of a guided missile destroyer cutting through dark water, bow lights glowing like distant stars. She moved toward the exit, not out of fear, not retreat, just done. As she passed the table, none of them spoke, not at first. She walked between Jake and Marcus without glancing in either direction, calm, even, unhurried. Then Jake turned in his seat, voice lower now, leaning toward her just enough that only their table would hear. "Careful walking alone, sweetheart. You might bump into someone a little less patient." She stopped, not dramatically, just mid-step. Her head turned, no expression, no stare down, just enough to acknowledge the words. Then calmly, she looked at him and said, "Funny thing about predators, Corporal. They're the easiest ones to track." A pause, then she turned and left. The door swung shut behind her with a soft click. For 3 full seconds, nobody moved. Marcus let out a slow breath. That was specific. Then Ethan shifted. She knew his rank. Jake tried to laugh, but it didn't land. His face had gone pale. How did she? None of them noticed the man at the end of the bar, older, salt and pepper beard, sleeves rolled up over faded tattoos, the kind you only got in certain units during certain decades. Master Chief Garrett Blackwood had been watching the whole thing from behind his half-empty beer. He didn't smile, didn't speak. He just reached for his phone, opened his contacts, and started typing. Then he stood, dropped cash on the bar, and walked over to their table. "You boys just made a mistake," he said. Jake looked up, irritation flashing. "Who the hell are you, Pops?" Garrett didn't blink. "Someone who knows exactly who that woman is, and you'll find out at 0630 tomorrow." He turned and walked out. The door clicked shut again. For a long moment, the 4 of them just sat there. Marcus finally broke the silence. "What the hell was that supposed to mean?" Ryan, the quiet one, the one who'd been watching it all night, spoke for the first time in 20 minutes. His voice was low, certain. "I think we just screwed up." Outside in the parking lot, Sarah Kincaid stood beside her truck, the night air cool against her skin. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a small digital recorder, clicked it off. 43 minutes of audio, every word, every laugh, every moment of disrespect, escalation, and poor judgment. She opened the voice memo app on her phone and began logging her assessment. Corporal Jake Thornton, impulsive, seeks dominance through volume, needs to prove authority in every interaction, potential for leadership if ego can be managed. Recommend isolation training and direct accountability measures. She paused, replayed the moment he'd called her sweetheart, flagged for dismissive language toward unknown contacts, indicative of broader respect issues. Next, Corporal Marcus Vaughn, insecure, escalates to prove worth to peers, follows Thornton's lead without independent judgment, anxiety markers visible under mild social pressure. Recommends stress inoculation and decision-making autonomy exercises. She clicked forward. Private Ethan Wolf. Follower. No independent action observed. Laughed when others laughed. Stopped when others stopped. Neutral presence. Requires structure and clear chain of command. Potentially reliable if properly led. And finally, Lance Corporal Ryan Mercer, only member of group to exhibit situational awareness, did not participate in second spill, observed rather than escalated. Father Force Recon Iraq 2003. Background suggests trained perception. Recommend further evaluation. High potential. She saved the file, encrypted it, sent it to her personal server. Then she stood there for a moment looking back at the bar, the lights inside warm and hazy through the windows. The sound of laughter muffled but persistent. She thought about walking back inside, about showing them her ID, about watching their faces drain of color when they realized exactly who they just disrespected. But that wasn't the play. The play was patience. The play was 72 hours. The play was watching them unravel under the weight of their own choices, in front of the entire base, in front of their peers, in front of the one person whose evaluation would follow them for the rest of their careers. She climbed into her truck, started the engine, and drove back toward the base. Tomorrow morning, 0630, Joint Operations Briefing Room. They'd find out who she was, and by tomorrow night, they'd understand what it cost them. At 0600 hours, the admin wing of Naval Station San Diego buzzed with the kind of quiet efficiency that only military installations ever managed. Everything smelled like strong coffee and burnt toner. Overhead lights hummed softly. Steel doors clicked shut with just enough pressure to remind people where they were. Down the far hallway behind a frosted glass door marked Joint Operations Integration Office, clearance required. Lieutenant Sarah Kincaid sat at her desk reviewing the finalized rotation schedule. She was in uniform now, crisp, pressed. The single gold trident above her left chest pocket caught the fluorescent light, the rectangular black patch on her left shoulder. No text, just an embedded RFID strip that opened every secure door on the installation. And the tablet in her hand carried the names of 56 personnel assigned to Task Force 7, 4 SEAL platoons, Marine Recon Elements, EOD Techs, Cyber Ops Liaison, and 1 4-man inter-unit attachment team that she'd been personally assigned to evaluate. A quiet knock came from the door. "Ma'am," said a petty officer stepping in with a folder. "Admin confirms the Marine attachment team arrived last night. Their eval cycle starts today." Sarah took the file without looking up. She already knew what it said. Corporal Jake Thornton, Corporal Marcus Vaughn, Lance Corporal Ryan Mercer, Private Ethan Wolf. She nodded once. No visible reaction. The petty officer hesitated. "Problem, ma'am?" Sarah signed the last line of the schedule with a stylus. "Not yet." She handed the tablet back, closed the folder, and stood, posture precise, not stiff. There was no urgency in the way she moved, no hint of escalation, just method. "Confirm their unit lead knows they'll be participating in the joint readiness brief this morning." "Yes, ma'am. They're scheduled to be present at 0630. "Good." Sarah picked up her cover from the desk. "Make sure the seating is staggered. I don't want them all together." The petty officer blinked, then nodded. "Understood, ma'am." Sarah exited the room without further comment. In the hallway, 2 instructors paused their conversation as she passed. One of them, a logistics officer, murmured, "That's Lieutenant Kincaid, right?" "Yeah," the other replied, voice low. "Took over integration oversight after Lieutenant Marquez rotated out. She's a SEAL, command qualified. 3 tours, signals and extraction ops. No media record, no public bio. Ghost file." The first one whistled softly. "She doesn't look like command." "That's the point." Sarah moved past them without acknowledgement. Down the corridor, past the wall of file cabinets, through the outer prep room. She paused beside the large glass panel overlooking the operations bay below. Marines ran ladder drills. SEALs cycled through room-clearing rotations. Sweat, commands, timing, all visible from where she stood. Her reflection stared back at her through the glass. Civilian last night, commander today. She watched them for a long moment, eyes narrowing slightly as she saw four men in tan camouflage pass through the far gate. Loud, confident, clueless. She didn't smile. She didn't flinch. She just folded the schedule, slipped it into her pocket, and turned toward the briefing room. It was time. The redemption. 1900 hours. The memorial corridor was empty, except for 5 people who stood in silence that felt heavier than words. Sarah had brought them back. Not to break them again, but to show them what was at stake. The 4 Marines stood shoulder to shoulder now, not quite at attention, but respectful. Changed. Something in their posture had shifted over the last 48 hours. The swagger was gone. What remained was harder to define. Maybe it was humility. Maybe it was understanding. Maybe it was just exhaustion, so complete that ego had no room left to breathe. Garrett Blackwood stood beside Sarah, his weathered hands clasped behind his back, watching them with eyes that had seen too many young men make the same mistakes. Some learned, some didn't. Some learned too late. Sarah's voice was quiet when she finally spoke. Tomorrow morning, 0400, final evaluation, compound assault. You'll have one chance to demonstrate everything you've learned, everything you've become, or failed to become. She let that sit for a moment. But before that happens, I need you to understand something. Captain Cross didn't die because he wasn't good enough. He died because the men around him didn't trust him until it was too late. Trust isn't built in a briefing room. It's built in moments like this, when someone stands in front of you and tells you the truth even when it's hard to hear. Jake stepped forward, not far, just enough to separate himself from the group. Ma'am, permission to speak. Granted. He looked at the floor, then at Captain Cross's photograph, then at Sarah. Ma'am, I need to tell you something about why I've been... He stopped, started again. I'm going through a divorce, custody battle. My daughter's 8 years old. Her name is Emma, and she thinks I'm a hero. His voice cracked slightly. I've been trying so hard to prove I deserve that. Prove I'm the man she thinks I am. I've been loud and aggressive and... He paused. I've been everything except what she actually needs, which is a father who knows when to listen, when to follow, when to admit he doesn't have all the answers. Sarah watched him, didn't interrupt. That night at the bar, Jake continued, I saw you sitting there, and I made assumptions, made you a target so I could feel a bigger. And I'm sorry, not because you turned out to be my commanding officer, but because you were a person and you deserved better. The silence that followed was different, cleaner somehow. Sarah nodded once. Your daughter doesn't need a hero, Corporal. She needs a father who knows the difference between strength and volume, between confidence and ego, between leadership and control. Jake's jaw worked, emotion threatening to break through. I don't know if I can change, ma'am. You already have, Sarah said. You asked for help. That's command. Marcus spoke next, voice quieter than Jake's, more uncertain. Ma'am, I've been trying to prove I belong since I got here. Every decision I make is about whether people will think I'm good enough. And last night in that water, I realized something. I was so busy trying to look capable that I forgot to actually be capable. Sarah's expression softened. The military doesn't need people who look the part, Corporal Vaughn. It needs people who can execute when everything's falling apart. You did that today. With frozen hands and fear in your chest, you handled those comms like a professional. That's who you are. Remember it. Ethan and Ryan said nothing, but something in their faces showed they'd heard it, understood it, carried it. Garrett pulled 4 small pins from his pocket, the same integration badges he'd shown them before. These were Captain Cross's, he said, his voice rough with years. Given to me by his widow after the funeral. She said he would have wanted them to go to someone who learned from his death instead of just mourning it. He handed them out, one to each Marine. You haven't earned these yet, Garrett said, but tomorrow you'll have your chance. Don't waste it. They left the memorial corridor different than they'd entered, walking slower, quieter, carrying weight that wasn't physical, but somehow felt heavier than any gear they had ever shouldered. Sarah stayed behind, alone with Captain Cross's photograph. I got the call today, she said to the image, to the young man frozen in time. Real mission, Syria, journalist captured, I'm taking them with me. She touched the frame. Garrett told me I'm crazy, that they're not ready, that I'm risking lives to prove a point. Her hand dropped. Maybe he's right, but I remember what you taught me, even though I never met you, even though you died before I was born. You taught me that a trust has to start somewhere, that someone has to take the first step, that leadership means believing in people before they believe in themselves. She stepped back. I'll bring them home, Captain. All of them. Then she turned and walked away. 0400 came fast and cold. The compound mock-up sat at the north end of base. 2 stories, 12 rooms, hidden corners, simulated IEDs. The kind of training environment that looked fake in daylight but felt real at night, with live fire and adrenaline and the weight of evaluation pressing down on every decision. Sarah stood at the entrance with a tablet. The 4 Marines were already in position, weapons checked, gear secured, faces painted with camouflage that made them look older, harder, ready. Garrett stood beside her, arms crossed, silent. Scenario, Sarah said, voice carrying across the compound. High-value target extraction. 4 hostages, 12 hostiles, 45-minute window before enemy reinforcements arrive. She looked at Jake. But there's a complication. New intelligence. One of the 4 hostages is an enemy agent. Deep cover. Bad intel on which one. You have to decide. Extract all 4 and risk the agent escaping, or leave one behind and risk leaving an innocent. Jake's face was stone. 30 seconds to decision point. No, Sarah said. You have until you breach, but once you commit, there's no changing course. She stepped back. Thornton, this is your op. You have tactical command. Execute when ready. For a moment, Jake just stared at her, the weight of that trust visible in his eyes. Then he turned to his team. Listen up. We split the difference. Extract 3. Detain the 4th separately for identification. Mercer, you analyze behavior during contact. Micro-expressions, stress indicators. Vaughn, you monitor comms intercept. Any phone signals. Any electronic communication. Wolf, you're on medical for confirmed hostages. I lead breach and provide cover. He looked at each of them. No heroics. We get in, we get them, we get out. Clear. 3 nods. Execute. They moved like a different team. Methodical, communicating constantly, listening to each other. Jake breached the first room with controlled aggression. Not reckless, not timid, just right. Marcus monitored comms traffic, called out patterns, identified a phone signal coming from the northeast corner. Ryan watched the hostages during the initial contact, saw the tells, the way one of them held eye contact too long, the way his breathing didn't match the fear of the others. Ethan prepped medical gear, assessed the first 2 hostages, cleared them for movement. 42 minutes in, they had 3 hostages secure and 1 detained separately. Ryan's identification had been correct. The detained man was the agent, confirmed through phone intercept and behavioral analysis. The alarm buzzed. Mission complete. Sarah walked onto the compound, stood in the center of the room, looked at the 4 Marines covered in dust and sweat in the kind of exhaustion that comes from perfect execution. You passed, she said. Jake stared at her. All of us, all of you. Marcus let out a breath he'd been holding for 3 days. Ethan actually smiled. Ryan nodded once, respect in his eyes. But before they could celebrate, before they could process what they'd just accomplished, the door to the operations building opened. Admiral James Keller stepped out. 59, gray at the temples, 3 stars on his collar. The kind of officer who didn't appear unless something significant was happening. Lieutenant Kincaid, he said, we have a situation. Sarah straightened. Sir. Keller handed her a tablet. Intel from Syria, American journalist captured by militia forces, 72-hour window before execution video. Requires immediate 4-man team plus SEAL command. He looked at the 4 Marines, still covered in dust, still breathing hard. You 4, he said, plus Lieutenant Kincaid, wheels up in 6 hours. Jake blinked. Sir, we just qualified today. Sarah turned to him. You're ready. Question is, do you trust that? Jake looked at his team, at Marcus who'd overcome panic, at Ethan who'd found courage, at Ryan, who'd been steady the whole time. Then he looked at Sarah, the woman they'd disrespected, the woman who'd broken them down and built them back, the woman who'd given them a chance when she could have destroyed them. "We trust you, ma'am," he said. Sarah held his gaze for a long moment, then nodded once. "Good. Gear up. Briefing in 30 minutes. This isn't training anymore." The gear room smelled like gun oil and cordite and nervous sweat. Jake checked his rifle for the third time. Marcus tested his radio encryption. Ethan inventoried medical supplies with shaking hands. Ryan was already packed, calm, waiting. Sarah entered. She was in full combat kit now. Plate carrier, sidearm, rifle. The trident on her chest seemed heavier somehow, more real. "Objective," she said without preamble. "Infiltrate compound. Secure American journalists. Extract without engagement if possible. Engagement authorized if necessary. Enemy force estimated at 30 plus. Intel suggests they're experienced." She pulled up a map on the tablet. "Insertion via halo jump. Night ops, 8 kilometers to target. You'll move on foot. Mercer, you're on overwatch. Sniper position here." She pointed. "Vaughn, you manage encrypted comms with Tactical Operations Center. Wolf, you're on medical for the journalist. Thornton, you breach with me." She looked at each of them. "Timeline is 4 hours from boots on ground to exfil. Missed the window, reinforcements arrive, and we're compromised. Questions?" Jake raised his hand. "Ma'am, what if the situation changes?" "Then we adapt," Sarah said. "I'll be making tactical calls in real time. Your job is to execute without question. Trust the training. Trust each other. Trust that I will bring you home." She paused. "Let that sink in. 72 hours ago, you didn't know me. Tonight, your life depends on me, and mine depends on you. That's what a team is." Garrett appeared in the doorway. He didn't say anything, just looked at Sarah. A long look, the kind that carried years of history and respect and the weight of men who'd seen war and survived. Then he nodded once. She returned it, and that was all the blessing they needed. At 2200 hours, they walked across the tarmac toward the C-130. The night air was cool, the plane's engines already spinning. Turbines winding up to pitch, 5 figures in full kit, moving with purpose. Inside the cargo bay was loud and cold. They strapped in, checked gear one last time. Nobody spoke. There was nothing left to say. Sarah sat across from them. She pulled out a small pin, Garrett's old integration badge, the one from Desert Storm. Looked at it for a moment, then tucked it into her chest pocket. Jake watched her. "Ma'am, can I ask you something?" She looked up. "Why are you giving us this chance after what we did?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. The engines roared louder. The plane began to taxi. "Because someone gave me one," she said finally, "and because the best leaders aren't the ones who never fail. They're the ones who fail, learn, and make sure no one else has to fail the same way." The plane lifted off. Below them, San Diego disappeared into a grid of lights. Ahead, darkness and distance, and a mission that would test everything they'd learned in 72 hours. Sarah closed her eyes, not to sleep, to prepare. And across from her, 4 Marines who'd been strangers 3 days ago, who'd laughed at her in a bar, who'd learned the hardest way what respect actually meant, sat ready to follow her into whatever came next. The C-130 rattled through the night sky at 28,000 feet. The cargo bay filled with the steady drone of engines and the metallic smell of hydraulic fluid and sweat. The jump light glowed red above the ramp door. 5 minutes to drop zone. Sarah ran through the checklist one more time in her head. Halo insertion, high altitude, low opening. Oxygen mass until 15,000 feet. Altimeter check. Formation discipline. 8 kilometers to target compound once they hit ground. 4 hours to extraction. She looked across the bay at the 4 Marines. Jake checking his rifle again. Methodical now instead of nervous. Marcus with eyes closed, breathing exercises, controlling the anxiety she'd seen in him 3 days ago. Ethan reviewing medical protocols on a laminated card. Ryan motionless, already in mission headspace. The loadmaster gave the 2-minute warning. They stood, checked each other's gear. Oxygen mask secured, altimeters synced, weapons tied down. Sarah moved down the line, checking each connection point, each buckle, each seal, not because she didn't trust them, because this was what leaders did. She stopped in front of Jake, made eye contact through the mask. He nodded once. She returned it. The ramp began to lower. The roar of wind filled the bay. The jump light turned green. Sarah went first, stepped into the black void, felt the immediate pull of gravity and wind. Then she was falling. She was out, stabilizing, watching her altimeter count down. Around her, four shapes followed in perfect formation. 15,000 feet. Oxygen masks off. 10,000 feet. Still falling. 5,000 feet. Pull. The parachute deployed with a hard jerk. Silence except for wind. She looked up, checked her canopy. Good. Looked around. Four other canopies spread across the darkness. All good. She keyed the radio. Comms check. Thornton good. Vaughn good. Mercer good. Wolf good. They descended through the cold Syrian night. Below, the desert stretched endless and dark. No lights, no civilization. Just rocks and scrub and the kind of emptiness that swallowed sound. Sarah hit ground first, rolled, came up scanning. The others landed within 30 seconds. Perfect interval. They collapsed their chutes, cached them under rocks, and formed up. She pulled out the GPS. 8 clicks northeast. Mercer, you're on point for the first 2. Thornton, you take over at the halfway mark. Vaughn, monitor radio frequencies. Any chatter I want to know immediately. Wolf, stay in the middle of formation. Move quiet, move fast. We have 3 hours, 40 minutes to target. They moved. The desert at night was different. Cold instead of hot. Silent instead of windblown. Every footstep on loose rocks sounded like a gunshot in Sarah's ears. But they kept pace. Jake had learned discipline. He didn't rush, didn't push, just maintained steady progress. 2 clicks and Marcus whispered over the radio. Multiple radio frequencies active. Enemy comms grid, bearing 035. Estimate 1 click northeast. Sarah raised her fist. They stopped. She pulled out the tablet, overlaid the intel map with Marcus's bearing. Patrol, she said quietly. Not supposed to be here according to intel. We hold position. Let them pass. Mercer, eyes on. Ryan moved forward, low, setting up on a small rise, his sniper rifle already tracking. Through the night vision scope, he could see them. 4 men, AK-47s, moving lazy, not expecting contact. 4 hostiles, Ryan whispered, passing south, 200 meters, were clear in 90 seconds. They waited, breathing controlled, no movement. The patrol passed, faded into darkness. Clear, Ryan confirmed. They moved again. 4 clicks in, halfway point, Jake took point. Sarah watched him navigate the terrain. He was thinking now, reading the ground, choosing routes that offered cover. When they crossed an open stretch, he sent them across in pairs, covering each other. Textbook. She didn't say anything, didn't need to. He was doing it right. 6 clicks in, they hit the ridge overlooking the target compound. Sarah pulled them into a depression in the rock. They set up observation. Ryan assembled his rifle. Marcus deployed the directional antenna for signal intercept. Ethan checked medical gear. Jake covered their 6. Sarah glassed the compound through thermal optics. The intel had been wrong. I count 23 thermal signatures, she said quietly. Intel said 12. Main building east side, that's where they're all holding the journalist. But we've got a problem. Jake moved beside her, looked through his own scope. The compound was bigger than briefed. More buildings, more guards. And the building where the journalist was held had only one entrance, a fatal funnel. The kind of approach that got people killed. What's the call, ma'am? Jake asked. Sarah studied the layout, ran through options. Every tactical approach she knew. Nothing clean, nothing easy. Then she saw it. The far building. Smaller. Separated from the main compound by 30 meters. Thermal showed 2 signatures inside. Bon. Vaughn, she said, intercept on that building. Far west, what are they saying? Marcus adjusted his equipment, listened, his face went tight. Ma'am, that's where they're holding the HVT, high-value target, ISIS regional commander. Not in the original intel. Sarah felt the mission shift under her feet. They'd come for one objective. Now there were two. The journalist, low risk but critical for humanitarian reasons. The commander, high risk but strategic value that could save dozens of lives down the line. Split the team and risk both objectives. Go for one and miss the other. 4-hour window, not enough time for both. Not by doctrine. She looked at the compound again. Calculated angles, timing, risk. Then she did something that went against every protocol she'd been taught. "Thornton," she said, "if this was your call, what would you do?" Jake blinked, looked at her, then at the compound. "Ma'am, doctrine says primary objective only. Extract the journalist." "That's doctrine," Sarah said. "What does your judgment say?" Jake was quiet for 10 seconds. Then he spoke, voice steady. "We split. Mercer and Wolf extract the journalist. Fast and quiet. You, me, and Vaughn go for the commander. 2-minute window, simultaneous breach. If we time it right, the confusion works for both teams." Sarah watched him. "That's not in any manual." "No, ma'am," Jake said, "but you taught us to adapt." She smiled. "Small, brief. Execute your plan, Corporal. I've got your 6. The next 90 seconds were a masterclass in trust. Ryan and Ethan split off, disappeared into darkness, moving toward the south wall where the journalist was held. Sarah, Jake, and Marcus approached the west building. Low, quiet, weapons up, 60 meters out, 50, 40. Marcus whispered, radio chatter increasing. They're changing guard shift. 20 seconds. 30 meters. Jake raised his fist. They stopped, waited. The guards moved. Shift change created a gap. 10 seconds of no coverage on the west approach. "Now," Jake said. They moved fast, closed the distance, reached the wall. Jake checked the door, locked but simple. He pulled a breaching charge. Small, quiet, set it, looked at Sarah. She nodded. He triggered it. The door blew inward with a sharp crack. Jake was through before the smoke cleared. Sarah followed. Marcus behind her. 2 hostiles inside, one reached for his weapon. Sarah put 2 rounds center mass. He dropped. The second hostile raised his hands. Jake controlled him, pushed him to the floor. The third man in the room was different, older, calm, watching them with eyes that had seen violence before and wasn't afraid of it. "Vaughn," Sarah said, "confirm identity." Marcus pulled out a tablet, compared the face to the intel photo. "That's him, ISIS Regional Commander, designation Apex 7. Outside, gunfire erupted. The main compound had realized something was wrong. Jake moved fast. Flex cuffed the commander. Hood over his head. "On your feet. Move." They exited the building into chaos. Guards running toward the main building where Ryan and Ethan would be extracting the journalist. Exactly as planned. The confusion working for them, but then the plan fell apart. A guard rounded the corner, saw them, raised his weapon. Jake turned, engaged, dropped him. But the sound brought more. 3 more hostiles converging. Sarah stepped in front of Jake. "Go, get him to the exfil point." "Ma'am, that's an order, Corporal. Go." Jake hesitated for 1 second, then grabbed the commander and ran, Marcus with him. Sarah faced the 3 hostiles alone. They fired. She dove behind cover. Concrete barrier, rounds sparking off stone. She returned fire. Controlled bursts. 1 hostile. Down, 2 remaining. They advanced, trying to flank. She moved. Combat rolled to new cover. Came up shooting. Second hostile dropped. The third got smart. Pulled back. Called for support. More gunfire from the main building. Ryan and Ethan would be clear by now. Or dead. No way to know. Sarah keyed her radio. Thornton status. 30 seconds to exfil Alpha. HVT secure. Mercer. Exfil Alpha. Journalist secure. Wounded but stable. Relief flooded through her. Both objectives complete. Now she just had to survive. The third hostile appeared with 4 more. 5 on 1. Bad odds. She fired until her magazine ran dry. Dropped it. Reached for another. That's when the round hit. Not center mass. The plate caught most of it, but the impact knocked her back, drove the air from her lungs. She went down hard, vision swimming, ears ringing. The hostiles advanced, then gunfire from a different angle. Precise, controlled. 3 rounds, 3 hostiles dropped. Jake appeared. Rifle up, firing. Marcus behind him, covering. They'd come back, ignored her order, came back for her. Jake reached her, pulled her to her feet. "Can you move, ma'am?" She nodded, couldn't speak yet, lungs still screaming. "Then we move now." They ran, Jake half carrying her, Marcus covering their withdrawal. Behind them, the compound erupted into full alert. Searchlights, sirens, the sound of vehicles starting. But they'd made it to the perimeter, into the darkness. The desert swallowed them. One click out, they reached the exfil point. Ryan had the journalist stabilized. IV running, talking quietly to keep him conscious. Ethan was on security. The HVT was secured to a rock. Hooded, silent. The helicopter came in low and fast. Black Hawk, door guns manned. It touched down just long enough for them to load. Journalist, HVT, gear, then up. Rotors screaming, bullets pinging off the fuselage as they climbed. Inside, Sarah sat against the bulkhead, breathing hard, ribs on fire where the plate had caught the round. Jake sat across from her, covered in dust and blood. None of it his. "You came back," she said. "Yes, ma'am." "I ordered you to go." "Yes, ma'am." "You disobeyed a direct order." Jake met her eyes. "You taught us that leadership means getting your people home. All of them. I couldn't leave you behind." Sarah stared at him, then at Marcus, at Ryan and Ethan. She wanted to be angry, should have been angry, but all she felt was pride. "That was incredibly stupid, Corporal." "Yes, ma'am," Jake said, "but it worked." She almost smiled. "Next time, follow orders." "Will there be a next time, ma'am?" Sarah looked out the open door at the Syrian desert falling away below them. "We'll see." 48 hours later, Naval Station San Diego was bright and loud and felt like a different planet. The medical bay was quiet, though. Clean, safe. Jake sat with his ribs wrapped. Bruised but not broken. Marcus had his hands bandaged again. Rope burns from securing the HVT. Ethan was on a saline drip for dehydration. Ryan looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days, which was accurate. Sarah walked in, out of uniform, civilian clothes. She looked almost normal except for the way she moved. Carefully, protecting her ribs. "Commander," Jake said, starting to stand. "Stay seated," she said. "This is off the record." She pulled up a chair, sat with them. "The journalist is stateside, full recovery expected. He's talking to media. The HVT is in custody. Intel estimates his capture will prevent at least 3 planned attacks. Higher command is pleased." She paused. "You should know that Admiral Keller has authorized permanent assignment for all 4 of you to Task Force 7, effective immediately." They didn't react at first. Then the weight of it hit. "Ma'am," Marcus said quietly, "after how we treated you." Sarah looked at him. "You treated a stranger badly. Then you grew. That's what matters. The military doesn't need people who never fail. It needs people who fail, learn, and become better." Ethan spoke for the first time. "We could have gotten you killed." "But you didn't," Sarah said. "You came back. You executed under impossible circumstances. You made tactical decisions that saved lives. That's what I evaluate. Not who you were, who you became." Jake leaned forward, wincing at his ribs. "Ma'am, I have to know. That first night at the bar, did you know Vaughn was going to spill that second drink?" Sarah was quiet for a moment. "I knew when he approached. Body language, trajectory, intent. The glass was already tipping before he bumped it." Marcus winced. "Then why didn't you stop me?" "Because I was evaluating you. Sometimes the best test is watching what people do when they think no one's judging. You showed me who you were. Then you showed me you could change. That's all that mattered." She stood. "You have 72 hours liberty. Then you report for integration training. You'll be helping me train the next attachment team." "Us," Jake asked, "training others?" "You know what it looks like when people make the mistakes you made. You're qualified to teach them not to." She headed for the door, then paused. "One more thing. There's someone who wants to see you. Master Chief Garrett Blackwood walked in. He looked at the four Marines, banged up and exhausted. Then at Sarah. They'll do, he said simply. Yes, Master Chief, Sarah replied. They will. Garrett pulled something from his pocket. 4 pins, the integration badges. Wore one of these in '91, he said. Desert Storm means you're qualified to operate with any unit, any mission, any time. Means command trusts your judgment. He handed them out, one to each Marine. You don't deserve these yet, Garrett said bluntly, but you will. Don't make us regret it. He turned to leave, then stopped. And boys, next time you're in a bar and you see someone sitting alone, mind your manners. You never know who you're talking to. He walked out. The 4 Marines sat in silence, holding their pins. Finally, Marcus laughed. Quiet, tired. We really screwed up, didn't we? Yeah, Jake said. We really did. But we fixed it, Ryan added. No, Ethan said. She fixed us. 6 months later, Anchor Point Tavern looked exactly the same. Same dim lights, same broken jukebox, same old bartender wiping the same stretch of bar. Sarah Kincaid sat at her corner table. Back to the wall, water with lemon, fresh fries. The muted television showed a news report about the rescued journalist. She wasn't mentioned. That's how she preferred it. The door opened. 4 men entered, not loud this time. Respectful. They nodded to Tom at the bar. He nodded back. Then they saw her. Jake approached the table. Commander, mind if we join you? Sarah gestured to the empty chairs. Operational or social? Social, ma'am, if that's allowed. Sit. They did. Ordered drinks. Jake got water. Growth. For a few minutes they just sat. Comfortable silence. The kind that comes after shared experience. Then the door opened again. New Marines, young, loud, cocky. One gestured too wide. A drink tipped. Amber liquid arced toward a corner booth where a young woman sat alone. Mid-20s. Dark hoodie. No patches. Water and fries. She calmly moved tables. Said something quiet as she passed. The Marines' faces changed. Sudden realization. Jake and Marcus watched from their table. Should we warn them? Marcus asked. Jake smiled. No, let them learn. The cycle continued. Sarah stood, dropped cash on the table. Good night, gentlemen. Good night, ma'am. She walked out into the California night. 3 years later, she stood at the memorial wall again. Commander now, training new officers, Garrett's retirement ceremony behind her. She presented him with Captain Cross's trident. It's not mine anymore, Garrett said. It's yours. Pass it when you find the next one. The next one who earns it, Sarah said. A young female SEAL entered the corridor. 24 years old, determined eyes. Sarah watched her approach Captain Cross's memorial. The cycle continued, but this time Sarah knew exactly what came next, and she was ready. The redemption. The compound training facility stood silent under the pre-dawn sky. 0400. The kind of hour when the world felt empty except for those who couldn't afford to sleep. Sarah Kincaid stood at the entrance, full combat kit, plate carrier, rifle. The trident on her chest caught the sodium lights from the parking lot. Behind her, Garrett Blackwood waited in the shadows, not participating, just witnessing. The way he'd witnessed 32 years of young operators learning the same lessons Captain Cross had died teaching. The 4 Marines approached in silence. Jake Thornton led. His gear was squared away now, not the sloppy arrangement from 3 days ago. Everything had a place. Everything had a purpose. That's what 72 hours of failure and redemption did to a man. Marcus Vaughn moved with less nervous energy, still anxious but channeling it now, using it as fuel instead of letting it consume him. Ryan Mercer was steady as always. The oldest, the observer, the one who'd seen through Sarah from the beginning but hadn't spoken up. He'd learned that silence without action was just cowardice with better PR. Ethan Wolfe brought up the rear, still quiet, but there was steel in his spine now that hadn't been there at Anchor Point. Fear didn't make you weak. Letting fear make your decisions did. Final evaluation, Sarah said, her voice cut through the morning cold. Compound assault, high-value target extraction, 4 hostages, 12 hostiles, 45-minute window. She pulled up the tablet, displayed the compound layout. But there's a complication. Jake's jaw tightened. Of course there was. Intelligence suggests one of the four hostages is an enemy agent. Deep cover, no confirmation on which one. You extract all four and risk the agent escaping. Leave one behind and risk abandoning an innocent. She looked at Jake. You have tactical command, Corporal. You decide. For 3 seconds, Jake didn't breathe, the weight of command settling on his shoulders like a physical thing. This wasn't simulated pressure. This was Sarah handing him the keys and saying, "Don't crash." "Time to decision," Jake asked. "You have until you breach. Once you commit, there's no changing course." Jake turned to his team, not to perform for Sarah, not to look competent, but because he actually needed their input. "Ideas," Ryan spoke first. "We can't extract all four, not with the time constraint, but we can't leave one behind without intel. So we split the difference, extract three, detain one separately for identification." "How do we identify?" Ethan asked. "Behavior analysis," Ryan said. "I watch micro-expressions during initial contact. Stress patterns, fear response. The agent will present differently than actual hostages." Marcus added, "I can monitor electronic comms. If the agent has any way to signal, I'll catch it." Jake nodded slowly. "Wolf, you're on medical for confirmed hostages. I breach with Mercer, covering. Vaughn handles comms and intercept. We get 3 out clean, hold 1 for confirmation, adapt based on what we find." He looked at Sarah. "Execute, ma'am. Execute." They moved like a different team than the one that had failed Station 6 3 days ago. Methodical, communicating constantly. Every movement deliberate, every decision conscious. Jake breached the first room with controlled aggression. Not the reckless bravado from before. Not timid hesitation. Just the right amount of force applied at the right moment. The simulation was good. Realistic. Hostiles appeared from corners. Civilians screamed. Smoke-filled rooms. The kind of chaos that turned training into panic if you weren't ready. But they were ready. Marcus monitored comms traffic from his position. Called out patterns. "Phone signal northeast corner. Active transmission." Ryan watched the hostages during initial contact. Saw the tells. One of them held eye contact too long. Breathing didn't match the others. Hands too still while everyone else shook. "Third hostage," Ryan called. "Detain separate." Jake executed without question. Secured 3 hostages, moved them to the exfil point, isolated the third for identification. 41 minutes. Mission complete. Sarah walked onto the compound floor, stood in the center, looked at 4 Marines covered in dust and sweat, and the kind of satisfaction that came from perfect execution. "You passed," Jake stared at her. "All of us, all of you." Marcus let out a breath he had been holding for 72 hours. Ethan actually smiled. First time Sarah had seen it. Ryan nodded once. The kind of acknowledgement that said more than words. But before they could process it, before they could celebrate, the door opened. Admiral James Keller stepped out. 3 stars on his collar. The kind of officer who didn't appear for routine training completions. "Lieutenant Kincaid, we have a situation." Sarah straightened. "Sir." Keller handed her a tablet. "American journalist captured in Syria. Militia forces. 72-hour execution window. Requires immediate extraction team. 4 operators plus SEAL command." He looked at the Marines, still breathing hard, still processing their pass. "You 4, plus Lieutenant Kincaid. Wheels up in 6 hours. Jake's face went pale. "Sir, we just qualified." Sarah turned to him, held his gaze. "You're ready. Do you trust that?" Jake looked at his team. At Marcus, who'd overcome panic. At Ethan, who'd found courage. At Ryan, who'd been the steady hand throughout. Then back at Sarah, the woman they'd mocked. The woman who'd broken them down and built them back. The woman who was now asking them to follow her into actual combat. "We trust you, ma'am." Sarah nodded once. "Good. Gear up. Briefing in 30. This isn't training anymore." The gear room smelled like gun oil and nervous sweat and the weight of real consequences. Jake checked his rifle for the 3rd time. Muscle memory fighting with adrenaline. Marcus tested his encryption software. Ethan inventoried medical supplies with shaking hands. Ryan was already packed. Waiting. The calm that came from accepting you couldn't control everything. Sarah entered in full combat kit. Plate carrier. Sidearm. the rifle that had put 10 rounds center mass at 300 meters with iron sights. She looked different somehow. Not the calm instructor from the beach or the controlled commander from the briefing room. This was Sarah Kincaid in her natural element, a warrior preparing for war. Objective, she said without preamble. Syrian compound, 18 kilometers northeast of Aleppo. American journalist embedded with humanitarian workers captured 4 days ago. Intel suggests execution video scheduled for tomorrow morning. She pulled up satellite imagery on the tablet. Estimated enemy forces 30 combatants, experienced, well-armed. They know we're coming. They always know we're coming. The question is whether they're ready. She traced the approach route. Halo insertion, night drop, 8 kilometers overland to target. Mercer, your overwatch. Sniper position on the northern ridge. Vaughn, you manage tactical comms. Wolf medical for the journalist. Thornton, you breach with me. Jake swallowed hard. Breaching with her, not behind her, with her. Timeline is 4 hours boots on ground to exfil. Missed that window, reinforcements arrive and we're compromised. Questions. Jake raised his hand. Ma'am, what if the situation changes? What if intel is wrong? Sarah met his eyes. Then we adapt. I'll make tactical calls in real time. Your job is to trust the training and execute. Trust each other. Trust that I will bring you home. She paused. Let that settle. 72 hours ago, you didn't know me. Tonight, your life depends on me, and mine depends on you. That's what a team is. That's what Captain Cross died teaching. That's what we're going to prove works. Garrett appeared in the doorway, didn't speak, just looked at Sarah with eyes that carried decades of watching young operators walk toward danger. He nodded once. She returned it. That was all the blessing they needed. The C-130 rattled through darkness at 28,000 feet. The cargo bay was loud with engine noise, and cold with altitude, and heavy with the kind of silence that came before real combat. Sarah sat across from the 4 Marines. She pulled out a small pin, Garrett's integration badge from Desert Storm, looked at it for a moment, then tucked it into her chest pocket over her heart. Jake watched her. Ma'am, can I ask you something? Ask. Why are you giving us this chance after everything we did? Sarah was quiet for a long time. The engines roared, the plane vibrated, the moment stretched. Because someone gave me one, she finally said. Master Chief Blackwood. 5 years ago, I failed pool comp 3 times, quit twice, came back both times. He could have washed me out, should have by the standards, but he saw something. Not what I was, what I could become if someone believed long enough for me to believe in myself. She looked at each of them. That's what leaders do. We don't just train people to execute orders. We show them who they can be when they stop trying to prove they belong and start actually belonging. The loadmaster called 2 minutes. They stood, checked gear, oxygen masks, altimeters, weapons. Sarah moved down the line, checking each connection, each seal. Not because she doubted them, because this was what leaders did. You checked, you verified, you made sure. Because if something went wrong, you wanted to know you'd done everything possible to prevent it. She stopped in front of Jake, made eye contact through the mask. He nodded. She returned it. The ramp lowered, wind roared, the jump light turned green. Sarah went first, stepped into the void, fell through darkness toward a country at war. The 4 Marines followed. The Syrian desert at night was colder than Jake expected. The kind of cold that came from clear skies and no moisture and altitude that sucked warmth from everything. They moved in formation, Sarah on point, Jake second, Marcus third monitoring comms, Ethan fourth with medical gear, Ryan fifth with the long rifle watching their 6 and scanning for threats ahead. 2 kilometers in, Marcus whispered. Multiple radio frequencies. Enemy patrol, bearing 035. Sarah raised her fist. They stopped. Went low. 4 hostiles, Ryan reported through his scope. 200 meters south, casual patrol. They'll pass in 90 seconds. They waited, breathing controlled. No movement except the slight rise and fall of chests and the occasional blink to keep vision sharp. The patrol passed, faded into darkness. Clear, Ryan confirmed. They moved again. At the 6-kilometer mark, they reached the observation ridge. Sarah pulled them into a depression in the rock, set up the Tactical Operations Center. Ryan assembled his rifle with practiced efficiency. Marcus deployed his antenna. Ethan checked medical supplies one last time. Jake covered their perimeter. Sarah glassed the compound through thermal optics. Then she went very still. Problem? Jake asked quietly. Intel was wrong. I count 23 thermal signatures. Should be 12. Jake moved beside her, looked through his own scope. The compound was bigger than briefed. More buildings, more guards, more complexity. Main building east side, Sarah continued. That's where they're holding the journalist. But there's something else. She pointed to a smaller building, separated from the main compound by 30 meters. 2 signatures in there. Vaughn, what are they saying? Marcus adjusted his equipment, listened. His face changed. Ma'am, that's not in the briefing. They're discussing a high-value detainee, ISIS regional commander. Designation Apex 7. Sarah felt the mission shift beneath her feet. They'd come for one objective. Now there were 2. The journalist, critical for humanitarian reasons and political optics. The commander, strategic value that could prevent future attacks, save lives down the line. Split the team and risk both objectives. Focus on one and miss the other. Neither option was good. 4-hour window, reinforcements after that. 1 team, 2 objectives. Not enough time by any conventional doctrine. Sarah ran the calculations. Every tactical approach she knew. Every contingency, nothing fit the parameters. Then she looked at Jake, at the Marine who'd failed his first assessment 72 hours ago, who'd learned, who'd grown, who'd asked for input instead of demanding compliance. Thornton, she said, if this was your call, what would you do? Jake blinked, looked at her, understood what she was asking. Not for a plan, for proof that he'd internalized the lesson, that leadership meant trusting your team even when doctrine said otherwise. Ma'am, doctrine says primary objective only. Extract the journalist. That's doctrine. What does your judgment say? Jake looked at the compound, at his team, at the 2 objectives separated by 30 meters of open ground. We split, he said. His voice was steady now, certain. Mercer and Wolf extract the journalist. South approach, minimal exposure. You, me, and Vaughn take the commander. West building, fast and loud to draw attention away from Mercer's team. Simultaneous breach. 2-minute window. If we time it right, the confusion works for both teams. Sarah watched him. That's not in any manual. No, ma'am, but you taught us to adapt, to trust our training and our team. This is me trusting both. Sarah smiled, small, brief, the kind of expression that said more than words. Execute your plan, Corporal. I've got your 6. The next 60 seconds were a masterclass in trust. Ryan and Ethan split off, disappeared into darkness, moving toward the south wall where the journalist was held. Sarah, Jake, and Marcus approached the west building. Low, fast, weapons up. Marcus whispered, guard shift change in 20 seconds. 10-second gap in coverage. They reached the wall. Jake checked the door. Locked, simple mechanism. He placed a small breaching charge. Looked at Sarah. She nodded. He triggered it. The door blew inward with a sharp crack that echoed across the compound. Jake was through before the smoke cleared. Years of training condensed into pure execution. Sarah followed. Marcus behind her, 2 hostiles inside. One reached for his weapon. Sarah put 2 rounds center mass. He dropped hard. The second raised his hands. Jake controlled him with efficiency born from repetition. Pushed him to the floor. Zip-tied his wrists. No hesitation. No excess force. Just enough. The third man in the room was different. Older. Calm. Watching them with eyes that had seen violence and wasn't impressed. Vaughn, Sarah said. Confirm. Marcus pulled out the tablet. Compared the face to the intel photo. That's him. ISIS regional commander. Apex 7. Outside, gunfire erupted. The main compound had realized something was wrong. Jake moved fast. Flex cuffed the commander. Hood over his head. Grabbed his arm. On your feet. Move. The commander stood slowly, testing Jake's grip, testing his resolve. Jake's voice dropped, hard, final. Don't! The commander stopped testing. They exited the building into chaos. Guards running toward the main building where Ryan and Ethan would be extracting the journalist. Exactly as planned. The confusion working for them. For 15 perfect seconds, it worked. Then a guard rounded the corner, saw them, raised his weapon. Jake turned, engaged, dropped him with 3 rounds. But the sound brought more. 3 hostiles converging, then 4, then 5. Sarah stepped in front of Jake, between him and the incoming fire. "Go," she said. "Get him to the exfil point." "Ma'am, that's an order, Corporal. Execute." Jake hesitated for 1 second, the longest second of his life, then grabbed the commander and ran, Marcus with him, following orders even though everything in him screamed to stay. Sarah faced 5 hostiles alone. They fired. She dove behind a concrete barrier, rounds sparked off stone, chipped fragments that cut her face, drew blood that ran warm down her cheek. She returned fire. Controlled bursts, 1 hostile down, 2 remaining in her line of sight, 3 more flanking. Bad odds, getting worse. She moved. Combat roll to new bomber, came up shooting. Second hostile dropped. Third pulled back. Called for support in Arabic, his voice calm, professional. This wasn't his first gunfight. Sarah keyed her radio. Thornton status. 30 seconds to exfil Alpha. HVT secure. Mercer. Exfil Alpha. Journalist secure. Wounded but stable. Relief flooded through her. Both objectives complete. They'd done it. Against doctrine. Against odds. They'd trusted and executed and succeeded. Now she just had to survive. The third hostile appeared with 4 more. 5 on 1. The kind of numbers that turned combat into execution if you weren't smart. She fired until her magazine ran dry. Dropped it, reached for another, fingers fumbling slightly. Adrenaline making everything feel slow and fast simultaneously. That's when the round hit, not center mass. The plate caught most of it, but the impact was like being hit by a truck. Drove the air from her lungs, knocked her back, vision swimming, ears ringing with the particular silence that came after close-range fire. She went down hard, tasted blood, couldn't breathe, couldn't move. The hostiles advanced, weapons up, taking their time. They thought she was done. She reached for her sidearm, hand moving through molasses, fingers not responding right, lungs screaming for air that wouldn't come. Then gunfire from a different angle. Precise, controlled. 3 rounds, 3 hostiles dropped. Jake appeared, rifle up, firing, Marcus behind him, covering. They'd come back. Disobeyed her direct order, came back for her. Jake reached her, grabbed her arm, pulled her to her feet with strength born from desperation. "Can you move, ma'am?" She nodded, couldn't speak, lungs still screaming. "Then we move now." They ran, Jake half carrying her, Marcus covering their withdrawal. Behind them, the compound erupted into full alert. Searchlights, sirens, vehicles starting, the sound of reinforcements mobilizing. But they'd made it to the perimeter, into the darkness. The desert swallowed them like they'd never been there. 1 kilometer out, they reached the exfil point. Ryan had the journalist stabilized, IV running, talking quietly to keep him conscious. The journalist was mid-40s, bearded, bloodied, but alive. Ethan was on security, scanning the horizon for pursuit. The HVT was secured to a rock, hooded, silent, breathing steady, waiting for whatever came next. The helicopter came in low and fast. Black Hawk, door guns manned, dust kicking up in massive clouds. The sound of salvation. It touched down just long enough for them to load. Journalist first, then HVT, then gear, then the team. Sarah climbed in last, felt hands pulling her up, felt the helicopter lift, felt bullets ping off the fuselage as they climbed. Inside, she sat against the bulkhead, breathing hard, ribs on fire where the plate had caught the round, face bleeding from stone fragments, vision still swimming slightly. Jake sat across from her, covered in dust and blood, some of it his from a cut on his arm, most of it not. "You came back," Sarah said. Her voice was rough, damaged. "Yes, ma'am." "I ordered you to go." Yes, ma'am." "You disobeyed a direct order." Jake met her eyes, didn't flinch, didn't apologize. "You taught us that leadership means getting your people home. All of them. Captain Cross died alone because no one came back for him. I couldn't, I wouldn't let that happen to you. Sarah stared at him, then at Marcus, at Ryan and Ethan, at these four Marines who'd been strangers 72 hours ago, who'd mocked her, who'd learned, who'd just saved her life. She wanted to be angry, should have been angry. He'd violated direct orders in combat. That was grounds for court-martial in some commands. But all she felt was pride. That was incredibly stupid, Corporal. Yes, ma'am, Jake said, but it worked. Sarah almost smiled. Would have if her ribs didn't scream every time she moved. Next time, follow orders. Will there be a next time, ma'am? Sarah looked out the open door, at the Syrian desert falling away below them, at the compound growing small in the distance, at the mission accomplished against impossible odds. Yeah, she said, there will be. 48 hours later, Naval Station San Diego felt like a different planet. The medical bay was quiet, clean, safe. Everything the last 72 hours hadn't been. Jake sat with his ribs wrapped, bruised but not broken, the cut on his arm stitched and bandaged. Marcus's hands were wrapped again. Rope burns from securing the HVT had reopened the damage from the fishing vessel. Ethan was on a saline drip for dehydration. Ryan looked like he hadn't slept in 3 days because he hadn't. Sarah walked in, out of uniform, civilian clothes, moving carefully. The bruise on her chest from the plate catch was spectacular. Purple and black spreading across her ribs like a sunset. Commander, Jake said, starting to stand. Stay seated, Sarah said. This is off the record. She pulled up a chair, sat with them, not as their commanding officer, as something closer to an equal. The journalist is stateside, full recovery expected. He's talking to media about the rescue. You won't be mentioned by name. That's standard for special operations. She paused. The HVT is in CIA custody. Initial interrogation has already prevented 3 planned attacks, saved at least 40 civilian lives, maybe more. Marcus let out a breath. Ma'am, after how we treated you, after everything we said at that bar, you still took us into combat. You trusted us with a real mission. Why, Sarah looked at him, really looked, saw the young man who'd deliberately spilled whiskey on her sleeve, who'd vomited seawater and kept swimming, who'd handled encrypted comms with frozen hands and fear in his chest. Because you proved you could learn, Sarah said. The military doesn't need people who never fail. It needs people who fail, learn, and grow. You did that. In 72 hours, you went from mockery to mastery. That's worth trusting. Ethan spoke quietly. We could have gotten you killed. But you didn't, Sarah said. You came back. You executed under impossible circumstances. You made tactical decisions that saved lives. That's what I evaluate. Not where you started, where you ended up. Jake leaned forward, wincing at his ribs. Ma'am, I need to know something. That first night, the bar. Did you know Vaughn was going to spill that second drink? Sarah was quiet for a moment, considering how much truth to give. I knew when he approached. Body language, trajectory, intent. The glass was already tipping before he bumped it. I could have stopped it. I chose not to. Marcus winced. Why? Because I was evaluating you. Sometimes the best test is watching what people do when they think no one important is watching. You showed me who you were. Ego-driven, approval-seeking, followers without judgment. She looked at each of them. Then you showed me you could change. That's harder. That's rarer. That's what matters. She stood. Admiral Kellery has authorized permanent assignment to Task Force 7. All 4 of you, effective immediately. You've earned it. They didn't react at first. Then the weight of it hit. You have 72 hours liberty, Sarah continued. Then you report for integration training. You'll be helping me train the next team. You know what failure looks like. You're qualified to teach others not to repeat it. She headed for the door, stopped, turned back. One more thing. There's someone who wants to see you. Garrett Blackwood walked in. He looked at the 4 Marines, battered and exhausted and changed, then at Sarah. They'll do, he said simply. Yes, Master Chief, Sarah replied. They will. Garrett pulled 4 pins from his pocket, the integration badges, worn through Desert Storm in Somalia and 32 years of proving that trust built better warriors than fear. You don't deserve these yet, Garrett said. Honest, direct, the way he'd always been. But you will. Commander Kincaid believes in you. Don't make her regret it. He handed them out, one to each Marine. Then he turned to Sarah. Walk with me. They left the medical bay together, walked down the corridor toward the memorial wall. Neither spoke, the silence comfortable in the way only shared experience could create. At Captain Cross's memorial, Garrett stopped. You did good, Sarah, taking them into combat that fast, trusting them with real stakes. That took courage. Or stupidity, Sarah said. Sometimes those are the same thing. Garrett smiled. Cross would have done it too, would have trusted first and let them prove it after. That's why I designed this system, so we'd have leaders who thought like him, who valued potential over pedigree. He touched Cross's photograph. 32 years since Mogadishu. 32 years of watching young operators make the same mistakes. And slowly, one evaluation at a time, watching them learn not to. Does it get easier, Sarah asked, sending them into danger, trusting they'll come back? No, Garrett said, it gets harder, because you start to care. But that's good. The day you stop caring is the day you stop being a leader worth following. He turned to her. I'm fully retiring this time. Moving to the mountains. No more monthly visits, no more observations. It's your program now, your legacy to build. Sarah felt something shift in her chest, the weight of responsibility, the honor of trust. I won't let you down. I know you won't. That's why I'm leaving. They stood in silence for a moment longer. Then Garrett extended his hand. Sarah took it. The handshake of warriors, of mentors and students, of a tradition passing from one generation to the next. Semper Fi, Commander. Semper Fi, Master Chief. Garrett walked away, down the corridor, toward retirement in mountains in the peace earned through decades of service. Sarah stood alone at the memorial wall, staring at Captain Cross's photograph, at the young man who did earning respect he should have had from the start. She pulled out her phone, typed a message to Admiral Keller. Request permission to establish formal off-duty evaluation protocol as standard for all Task Force 7 integration candidates. Designation Project Crossroads. Named for Captain Daniel Cross, whose sacrifice taught us that trust must come first. She hit send. 3 seconds later, the response came. Permission granted. Well done, Commander. Sarah smiled, then walked out of the memorial corridor toward whatever came next. 5 years later, Anchor Point Tavern looked exactly the same. Same dim lights, same broken jukebox, same Tom Bradley wiping down the bar with the same dedication he had shown for 40 years. Sarah walked in at 2000 hours, out of uniform, civilian clothes, but different now. Older. Lieutenant Commander. Promotion had come 18 months ago. Responsibility had come with it. She took her usual corner booth. Tom brought water without being asked. They nodded to each other. No words needed. 5 minutes later, the door opened. Jake Thornton entered. Staff Sergeant now, running integration training for West Coast operations. Behind him came Marcus, Ryan, and Ethan, all promoted, all transformed from the men who'd walked into this bar 5 years ago. They took a center table, ordered drinks. Jake got water. 2 years sober, custody settled. His daughter Emma visited every other weekend and wanted to be a SEAL. Marcus had married a speech therapist named Christina. The anxiety was managed now, not cured, but controlled through therapy and honesty and a partner who understood. Ryan taught hand-to-hand combat at the integration facility. His shoulder was fully healed. His reputation among new recruits was legendary. Ethan had earned his nursing degree, still active duty but planning to transition to VA medical work, giving back to those who'd given everything. Sarah watched them from her corner. These 4 men who'd changed her career as much as she'd changed theirs, who'd proven that redemption was possible. That growth mattered more than starting points. The door opened again. 4 new Marines entered, young, confident, fresh from a deployment rotation. They took a table near the bar, ordered drinks, laughed loud. At the center table, Jake caught Sarah's eye. She gave the smallest nod. He turned back to his drink, said nothing, did nothing, just watched. One of the new Marines gestured too widely. A beer tipped, arced through the air, toward a table near the window where a young woman sat alone. Mid-20s, dark hoodie, no patches, water and fries. Lieutenant Jennifer Shaw, Navy SEAL, 27 years old, Sarah's protege for the last 8 months. The beer hit her table, splashed her food. The Marines laughed. Jennifer didn't react, just dabbed at the spill with a napkin. Reorganized her table with methodical precision. Perfect execution. Sarah felt pride bloom in her chest. Shaw had learned well. 15 minutes later came the second spill. Deliberate. Whiskey instead of beer. Shaw moved to a different table. As she passed the Marines, she said something quiet. Too quiet for Sarah to hear. But she saw their faces change. Saw the moment they realized they'd made a mistake. Jake stood. The others followed. They dropped cash on their table and headed for the exit. As they passed Sarah's booth, Marcus whispered, "Should we warn them, ma'am?" Sarah shook her head. Let them learn. The 4 men left together, brothers forged in failure and redemption, living proof that the system worked. Sarah finished her water, prepared to leave. But before she could stand, her phone buzzed. A message from Jake. "Emma asked me to show her where I work, where I learned what real strength looks like. Can we bring her by base next weekend? She wants to meet you." Sarah typed back, "Of course, I'd be honored." She stood, dropped cash on the table, walked toward the exit. At the bar, Tom called out, "Good night, Commander." "Good night, Tom." Outside, the California night was cool, clear. The sound of the ocean distant but present. Sarah climbed into her truck, sat for a moment before starting the engine. 5 years since 4 Marines had called her sweetheart in this parking lot. 5 years since she'd let them hang themselves with their own rope. 5 years since the evaluation that had proven Garrett's system worked. She pulled out her phone again, scrolled to a photo, Jake and Emma at a father-daughter event on base. Emma wore her father's old Marine Corps shirt, but her eyes held something else. Determination. The kind Sarah recognized in the mirror every morning. Jake's caption, "She asked me what real strength looks like. I told her about a commander who stayed quiet when everyone else was loud, who trusted when doctrine said to doubt, who taught me that being a father meant being humble enough to learn." Sarah smiled, not the tactical smile she used in briefings, but something real, earned, the kind of happiness that came from knowing your life's work mattered. She'd been called sweetheart in this parking lot 5 years ago. Tonight she was Lieutenant Commander Sarah Kincaid, architect of Project Crossroads, trainer of 96 operators, mentor to the next generation. And the sweetest part wasn't the rank or the reputation. It was knowing she'd been right all along. That silence was a weapon. That patience was strength. That trust built better warriors than fear ever could. She started the engine, pulled out of the parking lot. Tomorrow she'd fly to Washington for a briefing with SOCOM leadership. They wanted to expand Project Crossroads to all special operations units, Army, Air Force, Marines, Coast Guard. Garrett's system refined by Sarah's experience proven by Jake's team and 92 others who'd followed. Captain Cross's legacy 37 years after Mogadishu still saving lives. Not through sacrifice, through teaching. Sarah drove toward whatever came next, toward new challenges and new operators and new chances to prove that the quiet voice in the corner was often the one worth hearing most. Behind her, Anchor Point's lights glowed warm through the night. Inside, a young woman sat alone, watching, learning, preparing. And 4 new Marines were about to discover that the most dangerous person in any room was the one who let you keep talking long enough to reveal exactly who you were. The tradition passed forward, one evaluation at a time, one lesson learned, one life changed. And somewhere in the mountains outside San Diego, Master Chief Garrett Blackwood sat on his porch with a beer and a sunset, in the satisfaction of knowing his life's work continued. Not because he was there to enforce it, but because he'd taught someone who would teach someone else. That was legacy. That was leadership. That was enough.